much for coming out for the Essex Film Club 80th anniversary. Um, the Essex Film Club has a very special place in my heart, which you'll find out why soon. You could say it's very close to home for me. It's such a unique Nutley story that I thought it had to be told, and what better way to do it than to celebrate it on its 80th anniversary. It's such a gem that we had here, and it's so interesting to hear the people who have come to it in the past. I unfortunately came to town after it was closed down, but even just learning about it and seeing and hearing from the people and trying to comprehend how this could survive for 44 years in Nutley. And it's weird, either people completely know about it or they know nothing about it. So for it to be here so long and to have people who don't know what it was makes it even more special to tell the story. And what we'll do tonight is I'm just going to give you sort of a brief history of the club itself, tell you how it came about, the founder, Bob Lee, and the future of it. And then we'll go into a little tiny question and answer period, which I'll have a special guest up here with me for that. And then we'll go into our classic movie night, where we'll have a cartoon, and we'll have a Pathé newsreel, which is very specific to Nutley, which I think you'll all get a kick out of. And then I'll do a Charlie Chaplin, a little clip from a movie of him. I won't do the whole movie, but it'll be a nice clip of, you'll get to see his antics. And then we'll have our feature film, which is a 13-minute silent, where the damsel gets in terrific peril. And maybe the hero will save her. I don't know. I don't want to spoil anything. Pauline was not ever tied to a railroad track. Everyone thought perils of Pauline. Pauline was never tied to a railroad track, as far as I can find. It's some kind of myth. But our heroine tonight, she will certainly find herself in some trouble. So the Essex Film Club, as I mentioned, the anniversary, it's 80 years, 44 years of which were in Nutley. And it really starts out with the founder, Bob Lee. When he was growing up, there's this terrific radio interview that he does in the 60s. And it's a 3-part interview, and in it he gives the whole rundown of how he became interested in films and sound and music and things like that. And one of his first recollections was seeing Mary Pickford, famous silent film actress, in some kind of peril in a basement where the basement's flooding, and he just remembers the excitement of it. He remembers that being the first film that he had ever seen. So when he was only at the age of like 10 or 12 years old, he convinced his parents to get him a small movie projector. Now this projector was hand cranked. It's not this is just showing one. It was hand cranked, and it wasn't electric. He had a little barn-like structure in the back of the house that he grew up in, and he set up this projector in there, and I think it used a calcium carbide light, which was very dangerous. He even mentions in his story of how at one point the film had caught fire, and he quickly snipped it with a pair of scissors, because this silver nitrate film is extremely flammable, extremely dangerous. But even at the age of 10 or 12, he was showing movies, which is really interesting. He was born in 1911, by the way, so we're talking very early on. This is Bob here, and again, you can see he's going to have a career in audio something, because he's only about 18 years old here, and this is a hand-built ham radio station. There's his call letters up there that he built himself in his home in Orange. So you can see the equipment's pretty sophisticated for a guy of 18 years old, and his son just gave me this picture recently, and I thought it was terrific. Now, he grew up, the first incarnation of the film club was in Orange, New Jersey, on Valley Street, and the way the story goes was he had sort of gotten interested in films through some friends, re-whetted his appetite for it, and they had sort of this limited film club, which they would run out of a rented space. They didn't show it at the house, but they had it at a rented space, and he did that from 39 up until the war years, and then he had to kind of slow down a little because of the war. And what he would do is sort of what I tried to recreate tonight, is when he would have the shows, he would make up these little notebooks and the Essex film notes, and he would hand it to the audience, and it was a way to try to introduce them to some of the stuff behind the the story. This way it wasn't just come see a movie and you don't know anything about it. So I tried, in a little honor to him, I tried to make up a little booklet today, and we'll use this today to go over some of the things that we're going to see later. This is an article talking about his early memories of that, and Phantom of the Opera was one of the films that was constantly shown. He liked to show a lot of, according to the interview, he tried to show about 60% silent, and the rest of it could be talkies. But he had a real proclivity to going towards the silent films, and Phantom of the Opera was one of his famous films that he would show at the club. Now, he was an audio engineer for WOR, so he is standing there in front of the guy with the glasses, and he would do audio work, and he was a terrific audio engineer, and a lot of the stuff that he did with the club was specifically audio related, and we'll speak about that. Here's another work photo. This is from a civil defense film on community shelter planning, and if you can see, there's Gene Hackman, and there's Bob in the background doing the sound work for that. So his main love, again, was audio work, and what he liked to try to do with the films was he liked to try to find as original scores as possible. See, when the silent films came out to the theaters back in the teens, they were given, the person who was going to sit there was a live piano player, and they were given sheet music to play that went specifically to that movie. Now, over the course of time, that sheet music didn't really travel with the film. So what he had a special interest in doing was trying to find as original as possible the scores for the films that he showed. And he would have them recreated by other people and presented on piano in the club, and he would record them. And then when he showed the films, he could have the proper score for the movie. Now, in 1948, they were living in an apartment prior to that. They decided they would like to find a house. Now, the way the story goes is that his wife was driving around, and somehow she saw the home first. This is on Harrison Street in Nutley. And she went back and she told him, she said, "Bob, you've got to come see this house. It's perfect for you." And it wasn't because of the house. She goes, because there's this very special barn in the back, and it's going to be perfect. It's going to be absolutely perfect for your film club that you want to build. And this is the building that was in the back. I've done a lot of research on it. I have no idea where it came from or why it existed. The house, which is where the picture is being taken from, was built in 1911. The garage, which that's the original garage, I don't have that anymore, was built in 1911. This building, I get the feeling, was from some other property. When properties were bigger, this may have been a outbuilding for another property, because it doesn't fit right on the property. It doesn't match in age, but it's double long. It's 16 feet wide by 50 feet long. The stories we've heard is that there was a motorcycle repair shop in there in the past. There was a jam and jelly factory for a while, which we somewhat confirmed through stories and through the fact that we had found different species of wild berries growing back in our backyard, including some grapes. So, and then I found a directory where I believe somewhere in the 30s, I read the owner, those directories will tell you what you did, and the owner worked for a preserve factory. He was in preserve manufacturing. So the building has had quite a bit of use over the time. Now, this is the card that he would send out. You can see this is an early one because Nutley we didn't have a zip code yet. We were Nutley 10. And what you could do is you could join the club. And that was the whole idea. You didn't pay to get in. You were either a member or you could make a donation if you wanted to go see a film that night and if you weren't a member. Now, this is the basic layout. I made this up to kind of give you an idea of what happens. So you would come in the front door, and immediately to your right was a little ticket window. Well, immediately to the right was a door to the projection room. And then a little in front of that was the ticket window. And it's a little tiny, everything was done in the club to kind of give you the feel that you were in a real theater, even though you were in an elongated garage. Then there would be the seats, and many of them were sometimes salvaged movie seats from other theaters. And then the piano would sometimes be on the left, and then some pictures I see it on the right. And then in front of that would be sort of a little stage, a couple feet high, had a couple columns on it, And at one point, he had, later on in the club's history, he had a motorized curtain, so he could actually open and close the curtain from the projection room, which is where he would be. Now this is Bob Lee himself, and he's right coming in the front door, and he's at the little tiny ticket window there. Now here's the interior shot of the club. You're looking forward now after you've come in past the ticket window. We see the piano on the right, we see the stage and the screen there, and the projection room is behind these people here. Now what was really nice is that since Bob was an audio engineer, he had a very, very good sound system for the time. He had some of the best equipment. He gave a quote of how much wire he ran in the building. It was something phenomenal for the time, because sound, he made a comment, he said, sound is very important for silent films, even though you don't realize it. And having an inappropriate score or improper sounds for a silent film is actually a sin. You should have, silent films need good sound. And there's someone up on the stage there. And again, you can see the pianos on the right here. He also had, besides the movie house chairs, he had, he could seat up to 50 people at any point in the theater. And it is said that he has never missed a show. Now, that piano that we saw is very important because he had two different people, and this is one of them here, Stuart Oberman, pianist. On some of the silent films, when he didn't have the recorded version for it, he would actually have Stuart come in and play live, which is a real treat because it's a special skill, because the pianist has to not only follow the music, but he has to make sure that he is doing what he needs to while the movie's running. And it must have been really great to be in the theater itself, watching a silent film and having a live piano accompaniment to it. And Stuart Oberman, I think he just died recently. I didn't get to meet him before he passed away, but I would love to have heard his stories. He did write a book about being a piano player and about his working with the silent movie industry. This is a little booklet that Nutley put out, and it listed all the things that the different clubs that Nutley had at the time. And inside the film club, what's listed, I love the phone number, NU2-8531. The Essex Film Club is really technically the oldest film society in the U.S. It's the oldest private film society, and it's technically still running today under Don Lee, his son. Here's Bob in the room, the projection room area, with some of his audio equipment. The room was packed with all types of equipment. He had several different projectors to play different size films, because they weren't all just 35s. There were 16s, and there were even 9s. And he also had multiple projectors in the room so that he could do continuous programs, because a movie doesn't fit just on one reel. It could be 2 or 3 reels. So with the multiple projectors, he could be showing a film and have, that seamless transfer from one reel to another. This is a little catalog of, not a catalog, sort of a program for the year. And this is some of the films that he would show in the 51-52 season. And he would give you a rundown of when he was going to show it. Typically shows were once a month on Saturday and Sunday. And this program would go out to people so that they had an idea and that they could know ahead of time what they were going to see. This is a nice shot because it shows you now from the stage perspective looking back. So what you're seeing back there is the projection room with the various holes in the wall. And the idea of keeping the projection room separate was so that the sound was cut down of the film running. It allowed Bob to work in the background, unobstructed, and it sort of gave you that feel that you were in a real theater. I'm not sure, but that might be, I'll have to ask Don, if that might be someone associated with the Perils of Pauline right there. I know I have another picture of him. I'm not sure if that's the same gentleman there or not. Now, the interesting thing about the club is that it brought famous people to Nutley. There are a lot of famous silent and stage actors and actresses that actually came physically to Nutley to either visit the club to see a show or to visit the club to purchase films from Bob, which he restored. So here is Minta Durfee in the middle, and she's obviously doing this scene with Charlie Chaplin. And Minta Durfee was married to a famous actor, silent actor called Fatty Arbuckle. That was his wife. So this is Minta acting with Charlie Chaplin, and there she is in the club in Nutley, visiting Bob Lee, and they're sitting in front of the piano. And I'd love to be able to read the sign back there, but it'll tell you what, he had that sign up there to tell you what the next show would be. Now, the club was also designed with not only salvaged movie seats, but any kind of antique fixtures that he could get from different places. So there were all types of antique lighting, some curtains up there. It was very well designed. It kind of gave you the feeling that you were in a real theater at the time. Now, this handsome young gentleman here is Neil Hamilton, consummate stage and radio and TV actor. But he also visited the club too. Now, I always hate reducing people down to not what their lowest is, but what's the most common bond. So if you don't know Neil Hamilton as a stage or a film actor, you may remember him as Commissioner Gordon from Batman series, if you watched the Batman series, like I did when I was growing up. So Commissioner Gordon, he was also he was a very handsome man, actually. But he had a whole stage career, radio career. Most of the people in the early days went from radio to film, and there was that strong tie-in between the two. This is a new one that I just found out about. This little boy here, this is a Charlie Chaplin movie called The Kid, and that little boy, this is one of his first starring roles. He was only in 2 minor things prior to this, but that little boy grew up to be Uncle Fester. Do you guys know his name? Jackie, yes, Jackie Coogan. So he had, according to Don Lee, the son, he needed a copy of the film that he was in. He was in The Kid. He starred in it. He was Charlie Chaplin, but Bob had done such a good restoration of it, had a good copy of it, that he came to Nutley and purchased the film for Bob. Here's another young actor that you guys may know from your time. This is Johnny Crawford from The Rifleman. So Johnny Crawford had visited the club, and we have a wonderful picture of him sitting with Mrs. Lee right in front of the projection wall, and that doorway there, that would lead outward. That's the door to the driveway. Now, he didn't visit the club. This is from Oliver and Hardy. But Stan Laurel never visited the club, but he had a very long correspondence series with Bob Lee, and there's many letters written back and forth, and he knew of the existence of the club, and he would talk to Bob Lee about different things, film-related, and actually some of those letters were printed on an online, or it might even be book form, publication. I think it's called Letters to Stan, and he used to love to correspond from where he lived, and he and Bob had a very good relationship back and forth. Now, in 1955, we had our first problem with the club. The building inspector in the town, named Fitting, knew this club had been running since '48 in Nutley, started to feel that this club violated town rules as far as zoning. And the idea was, you can't have someone come to your house and sell them a ticket and to see a movie. You're basically running an illegal movie theater. And this turned into a very, very big situation, because after he had summoned Bob, Bob tried to fight it, saying, this is no different than me having people come to my house to watch TV. I don't charge them to get in. They are club members, and if they want to come in and they're not a club member, they can make a donation. But the Board of Adjustment did uphold the ruling, and for a while they shut down the club. Now, Bob was not going to just let this go away. He's been doing this club since 1939, and he felt that he was in the right. So one of the things that the inspector had said, well, if this was in your house and it wasn't in a separate building, then we could, maybe consider something different. So Bob went to an architect, and he designed a breezeway that would connect the house to the garage, or to the barn. And when he brought that to him, he said, okay, well, I'm going to have this built, and that should solve the problem. Building inspector didn't go for it, still denied it. This situation, which took about, I think, 15 months total, which is the only time the club was ever shut down, went all the way up to Superior Court. It was just about to head into Superior Court when I get the feeling is what happened is, this is just a guess, but I bet the town commissioners at this point, when you're getting press like this is only one of many articles that I've seen in big papers, said to the building inspector, we've got to stop this. We've got to find a solution. This is starting to get ugly. We can't have this publicity. The guy just wants to run his club. So what they did was they worked out a compromise. The building inspector said, listen, if you do these things, and he made a list of about 20 things, which included adding an extra door, making sure all the doors open outward, fire extinguishers at certain spots. If you do these things, we'll let you go. Well, Bob did them, and the club started right back up again and continued all the way up until his death. But that was the first drama that the club had, was fighting this building inspectors. So here he is. They're back in business again. This is him outside now. You're looking at the front door of the club. There's the driveway. His house would be up here to the right. Now, the second controversy that happened, and this is a shot of Bob in the front door of the club, and at one point he had this large wall here, and I guess that was a good place to hang movie posters. But the second major controversy for the club was the showing of this film. Birth of a Nation is a very historic film. D.W. Griffin. And the idea was that it was one of the first full-length silent movies. It had a lot of unique filming techniques that weren't used, up until this time. They were sort of new to the industry. It was a terrifically filmed thing. The problem was the story has a little bit of a Southern Ku Klux Klan segment to it. Not endorsing, but just sort of, it was in there. So Bob was getting ready to present this film, and as we showed before, he would announce either in the papers or in brochures. And what happened was, he had announced that he was going to show this film at the club. So the night that was going to show, the NAACP had sent protesters, and this is them marching in front of the house, because they felt that the film was, anti-Negro, and what they wanted to do was try to stop it from going. So the way I got the story from the Sun was that the way Bob handled it, which was pretty smart, was he came out to the group and said, I understand what you're protesting about, but do you know what the film is, and have you seen it? And the guys that were, protesting said, no, we were just told by our chapter to come out here. So he explained it to them and said, this film is being shown as sort of movie history and has nothing to do with promoting anything about, slavery being good or promoting the Ku Klux Klan. And the group just disbanded, and he was able to show that show. And he actually showed it again at one point in Lincoln School, in the big screen in Lincoln School. So it was his sympathetic handling of the situation. He could have called the police, he could have done a million other things, he could have not shown the show, but he never missed a show. He wasn't going to stop a show for anything. And once it was explained where he was going with it, everything was fine. Now, we talk about famous people that have come to the club. This is someone famous also. This man's name is John Griggs, and he again was a stage actor, did a lot of radio work. He has been on TV in certain films, but what you might remember, and again I don't try to, it's a famous kind of little bit character he had. He was Mr. Marshall, the guy who ate the dog food when Ralph Cramp had thought that the dog food was some special dish that Alice had made up. So he played Mr. Marshall for like 2 or 3 episodes he played. But what happened as a result of this is that John Griggs was also very, very big into movies. He had his own sort of theater at his house. I read that he had invested thousands of dollars in amassing different types of films. And the two of them, Bob Lee and John Griggs, having the same kind of passion, they actually formed a friendship and started a business. And the business was called Griggs Movie Drome, and it was run out of the club at 263 Harrison Street in Nutley. And the idea was that they would take these restored films, especially the ones that had these proper scores to it, and they would sell them to people. And they put out this little catalog here. I think I forget when this one's from, 1970 something, 76. And you could go in and you could order your own copies of these films. And here is a poster. It's about this size by this size, and there was many of these made up by a gentleman named Anthony Phillips. I've been trying to find him because he's a great artist. He captures all this stuff wonderfully. But you can see on the bottom there, compliments of Griggs Movie Drone, 263 Harrison Street. So any place that might have been showing a film from Griggs, I guess they had access maybe also to these posters, and they could post them up when they were going to do their film showings. This is a Films in Review magazine, and what's really nice is they did a wonderful large article on the Essex Film Club. And as I mentioned, it is the oldest continuously operated film society in the U.S., and it is still registered, going on 80 years. But it was a wonderful multiple-page story. I think that was actually Linda Redgrave on the front cover there. Lynn Redgrave. Bob Lee also had a shot on TV. I mean, he just wasn't behind. He was actually a member on To Tell the Truth. And that's the show where the three people would get on before the panel, and the panel had to ask the questions to find out who was the real person they were describing. So the idea was they were trying to find who the person was that had this private movie theater, and he was grilled. And I think Kitty Carlisle, Bill Pullen, Peggy Cass, and Gene Rayburn were the panel, and they did figure it out. They figured it out and they guessed it, but he still got, I think he got some luggage or something. I have to ask his son about that. Now, the one other legacy that Bob left us with, it was actually a couple things, and this is an interesting story. In the 50s, the first town historian of Nutley, Ann Troy, found an old film, was given an old film that was completely deteriorating. And she thought it might be something special, so she brings it to Bob at the film club. And Bob had all these resources, he knew where to go to get things taken care of, especially with film. So he took the film and he got it restored. They saved as much as they could of it. I think they saved 8 minutes out of the 20. And it turns out to be the oldest known film of Nutley. It's a parade in Nutley from 1918. And if it wasn't for the town historian Ann Troy going to Bob Lee's house at 263 Harrison Street and giving it to him and him restoring it, we would never have these images. I did do a show on this several months back, and it is just a wonderful film of Nutley in 1918. And we only have that because Bob salvaged it. He also did work on the 1942 film that we had shown, Nutley at War. So it was wonderful that we had this great resource right in town to help us save these things. And here's it turns out also that 1918 film was done by Catherine Russell Bleecker, and I'm doing a lot of research on her, and it turns out that she could end up being extremely famous. She may very well be the first female filmographer ever. There was someone who did a film prior to her in 1914, but it wasn't, she was the actual director and producer and actually did the filming herself, and I'm trying to get her recognized. And as far as we know of, the film that Bob Lee helped save is the only known example of her work that exists. So, very interesting. We'll find more on her soon. Now, in 1992, Bob did pass away. He was coming back home from a job he had, I believe, at the Ramsey Theater, and he did pass away. And there were many, many tributes to him. He will be severely missed. I never got the chance to meet him, which is really unfortunate. But the legacy that he left behind and the memories that he left behind in the club will go on forever. And many of the things that he's done as far as getting these proper scores onto the films have been preserved and are in different repositories around the U.S. So many of these things have been saved because of him. And just a terrific guy, and we owe a great deal to him. Now, there's another twist. This is actually a letter that someone wrote and just talked about how he went to a show and how he was sitting with some people there, and it turned out that they had been there 35 years before to see a show, and they were back again. And this gentleman was just writing how amazing it is that this club has existed for so long. Now, after he passed away, got forgotten about, but some of his films were in the garage of the property, which was a little bit to the left of the film club. And this is just kind of show how this building has survived so many things, from being the Jam and Jelly Factory, motorcycle club. Well, it was almost destroyed because one severely hot day, the film canisters, which had silver nitrate film, which is one of the most flammable things on the planet, literally blew up. It blew up the garage. It didn't just catch fire. There were some firemen that I've spoken to that were were in the town at that time, and they said it was unbelievably noisy and smoky. And what happened was, it decimated the garage. The garage was blown off its foundation. Luckily, no one was hurt, and luckily, more fortunate is that they were able to save the club, the film club, because the garage and the film club were only about 10 feet apart from each other. So we're very fortunate for that, and they were able to put out the fire without any damage to the club. When they had to rebuild the garage, they actually had, because of new codes, the garage couldn't go this closer to the property line like it used to be. So now the garage and the film club are only about 3 feet apart. And I'll tell you how I know that. Because oddly enough, in 2002, there's this young family looking for a house. And that young family is my family. Now, one day my wife's driving around and she sees a sign on the property. It says, "For sale." She goes, "John, you gotta come see. It's a house for sale. We're living in an apartment down the street." I go, there's no sign. So she had the number, we called it. What it turned out was that after Mr. Lee died, Mrs. Lee lived there for a few years, but then it was sold to this young couple who bought it as an investment, boyfriend and a girlfriend. Well, things didn't go well with that, and they had they were going to renovate the house, but it got demolished, things were torn apart, but they never got to renovate. And then one of the workers that was working on the house for the boyfriend, he had a construction company, was squatting in the house. So anytime the for sale sign went out and he saw it, he would run out of the house and take the sign away. But it was just in that short period of time that my wife had seen it that we were able to make contact, and we actually ended up buying the house, not knowing really about the film club. I had heard about a film club on Harrison Street because I was doing my history research, and I did go to this house at one point and leave a note, but I never got a return on it. But when we got the house, it had been at least 3 or 4 years of no one maintaining it whatsoever. This is all the overgrowth from the back door of the house looking to the club there. And it was just an absolute mess. Now, the other interesting thing is, the thing that clued me in that I might be having a good property here was, we're sitting at the closing with the lawyers, and if you've ever done a closing, you have to sign your name 1,000,000 times. The lawyer gets to one part of the thing, and he looks up, and he looks down, and he looks up, and he goes, "Mr. Demery, you're going to need to agree to not run any movie business out of the house." And I said, I thought about it as if that was an important question. I go, okay. And I didn't know what that stemmed from. It still came back from that 1950s argument. So there is actually a little addendum there's a rider in my mortgage that says I can never run it as a film club. So that's why we're here tonight instead of my house. So the club itself was deemed unsalvageable. The town had said it must be demolished. The house was abandoned and condemned, and the club was absolutely condemned. They said it needs to come down. This is my daughter. She's here tonight. And that's her in front of the stage. The ceiling was caving in. The roof had a bow in it about this low. It was a big mess. But there were still nice features around it. Some of the old lights that were around there. This was the heating system at the time, which very sketchy. And this is the ticket window, the old ticket window. But the building itself, we had to take boards off of it. We went in it, and the town did say to me, "You have 60 days to get, to take this building down." So what I said to them was, I said, "I'm a contractor." And this is how fate kind of really works in. Fate's worked in a couple things on this. I said, instead of giving me 60 days to take it down, give me one shot to make it right. Give me 60 days to try to fix it. So while my family lived in a condemned house, I spent the first 2 months out in the back working on the shop. And we put a lot of work into it, and the whole family kicked in, and we put some foundation stuff in, and I completely reframed the ceiling, put new wiring in, and utilized the best labor that I could, which is free child labor. It's my son John. It was either you help Dad or you don't eat tonight. And through all that work and through the perseverance and through the town understanding how important I felt it was, and they saw it, and giving me that chance, we actually turned it around and we saved the club. The building is now stabilized. Thank you. It's stabilized. It's there. And it's only because we were given this chance. And again, how fate steps in to make it where the second town historian for Nutley gets into the same house. He meets the son of the previous owner, who introduces him to the fact that there was this 1918 film. So that film came about through the first historian and the father, and then the second historian and the son, to be shown again. It's just really interesting. I think sometimes things work for a reason. So we're very fortunate that we're able to save this building. And I am a carpenter by trade, so I have turned it into my workshop. It is now my workshop. So, excuse me? Most of it. I'm not quite done yet. I got a few things left to do. But the club is safe. That's all that matters. And I'm very proud to say that the club building is only the third property to ever be recognized by the Nutley Historic Preservation Committee to be put on its historic register. So now that means that no one can change it or nothing can happen to it, even after, if we ever leave the property. They'll have to keep the club building as it is and saved forever, which I think is just an absolute treat, and it's really special. So that is the history of the Essex Film Club. And what I'd like to do now is, before we get into our movies, I'd like to call up a special guest and for maybe some quick question and answers. So Don, are you here? Is Don Lee here? All right, come on up for a second. This is Don Lee. This is Bob's son, current owner of the Essex Film Club name, and he keeps the website going. So I thought it would be real great to have Don up here, and maybe you could ask some questions, and we would be glad to answer them for you. So does anyone have any questions about the club in particular, or anything about the Essex Film Club, or movies in general? Or?
When you were a kid, what was your job at the movie
Before the
theater?
motorized curtain went up, me and my brother would argue, who's going to pull the curtain?
So you wanted to do that. That was a big thing.
Everybody wanted to do that.
That was a big thing.
My father fixed it. He put the motor on it. So that was the end of our fun. And I learned how to, of course, use projectors. I was a projectionist at 4 years old, 5 years old.
Did Jane do any live shows? Like
No,
vaudeville type thing?
one show we had John Briggs that John mentioned. He talked, went up on the stage, so we do have pictures of that out there.
I'll have to get things.
But no, not really. The stage really wasn't big enough.
In the presentation, John mentioned one part where your dad worked for WOR.
He worked for WOR, yeah.
Okay, did he actually work for the station?
He worked for the station in New York. It was really called RKO back then.
Yeah.
WOR bought it later.
Did he know a man named Jack Popley by any chance?
Yes. As I remember, he didn't like it.
He was a friend of mine, and he died 36 years ago though, or something like that. But he was he owned telemeasurements over in Clifton, Jack Popley, for many years.
What a telescene over there.
Yeah, and they actually operated the Radio Club of America for since 1909 out of New York.
Dan started a radio station up in Middletown, New York. So 44, and he said, well, I'm going to get out of here now. So we got a good job in New York. And it was 44 to 64.
Okay.
Because they put him into where the rock and roll, so he didn't like that. So he quit. Got a good year.
Any other questions or comments?
Look,
Well, I know we like silent movies. Who were like some of his personal favorite movies?
Hunchback of Notre Dame, Phantom of the Opera. Yeah, he liked the John Chaney pop. Not the 42 one,
No,
the 25.
So did rat you out? Is that how the
No, my father
inspector
went
came?
around to everyone and says, no, we have no problem. We do.
There was houses all around there?
Oh, yeah. It's just, Mr. Fitty. No, yeah, they went to all the neighborhood.
They fired.
Was grease in the palms part of life back then?
My father would have never done it.
No, his father probably would never have done that.
He would never have done it. He went, that's why I was going to go to the
They
Superior
grew up
Court.
Valentino movies, the Sheep of Araby and that kind of
Oh, yeah, he has the Son of the Sheep and the Sheep, yes, we have it.
It's quite a list when you go through the newspapers and you see, you know, he would advertise in the newspapers. The movies that he showed, he didn't just show, you know, the really, you know, ones that we all know. He showed a lot of stuff that was a little lesser known, and it was quite a variety. It was very nice to see. And I've met several people who have been to the club. I was hoping to have someone here tonight that had been to it. And they said it was a very comfortable, nice experience. It was an event. It wasn't just watching a movie. You got to hear, you know, Bob would come up and speak before the movie, and he would have notes, and he'd let you know what was going on, and give you a little backstory to it. So it was a very comfortable event.
And he could talk.
And he could talk.
Definitely.
Did he ever meet Fatty Arbuckle?
No, well, Arbuckle died in '33. He tried to make a comeback because it was
A bad court case.
that was thrown out. He really wasn't.
Didn't Fatty Arbuckle have a really bad reputation?
He had a bad reputation, but that was thrown out of court. He had nothing to do with it. He made a couple of sound movies in the '30s, which are pretty good. He had like a baritone voice, had a nice sounding voice. But he had a heart attack and one, something like that. Yeah.
Every time I meet Don,
The movies are good. I
Yeah.
have them. I have them.
every time I meet Don, he's always like, oh, you know who else I remember was there? And he'll tell me some name, and I'll go, holy mackerel, that was terrific. He has a whole list, which he hasn't given me yet.
And is there going to be like a display in the store?
Well, no, the house itself, the building, not even the house, the building is on the preservation list, but it's not like a museum. There's no permanent display. That's why we really wanted to do this, you know, special tribute and anniversary tonight, to get people to remember. I mean, it has been 80 years since it started, but there are people who have been there are people who remember it, and I think a story like this is very special and unique to Nutley. And once again, it makes Nutley the center of the universe to see that all these stars have been here, all these people know about this club. This club has been written about in papers nationwide. He sold films not only across the country, but, you know, to other countries. So the Essex Film Club is really well known once you know about it.
Who are the big female stars? Mary Pickford, Theda Barra, Ola Negri, what do you think of them?
Yeah, they're big ones, yeah. Of course.
We have a big one tonight, Mabel Norman.
Yes.
She'll be in our feature film tonight.
Remember the three people to United Artists? What was that?
Mary Pickford,
Mary Pickford,
Charlie
D.W.
Charles
Charles
Corbett,
Right. So they started United Artists.
Cool.
That's why they chose Modern Time is suitable for United Artists.
One more question in back.
Will you be showing other movies other nights?
I would like to.
I mean, since you've got the space here.
You can't do it at my house.
No, here.
Go in the room.
Oh, we have the facility and we can arrange.
That's the second time that's been brought up. I think it'd be terrific to have classic movie nights again under the auspices of the Essex Film Club.
I would have
Museum.
I would have the files.
Yeah, he has a terrific collection of movies.
They could do it here at the museum. I
There's-
thought there was going to be a display at the museum.
No.
I'll be happy to donate any DVDs that are made from Don and his father's collection.
That's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful. All right, is that it for questions? Because we'll get set up for the movie. Thank you very much.
Okay.